All right, looks like we're all good. Thanks everybody for joining. Welcome again to another workshop with me on aerodynamics. Once again, the purpose of tonight's discussion is that you own the workshop. So I've got Jonas, one of our engineers, here with me today, who's going to be scanning all of the questions that you're sending that are coming in. Because I am not capable of multitasking and talking and reading at the same time. So he'll be basically going through your questions and feeding them through to me. And we can talk about aerodynamics tonight and all of those questions that you guys have got. So yeah, once again, you benefit not just from my experience, but from the experience of the whole team. So we'll do our best to answer any questions you've got tonight. I've already got a big list of questions that people have been sending through by email or through comments on the various social media network sites. So we'll start with answering some of those questions. And by all means, whatever you guys want to ask, what interests you from those questions, further questions you might have, get in there, comment, and Jonas will feed those through to me, and we'll basically have an open discussion. Alrighty. So one of the first questions, which is a common one that we get, is latex tubes. Basically the question was, can you use latex tubes with carbon clinchers? Good or bad idea? Nowadays, with the tubeless revolution that we're having now, the new tubeless tyres are now definitely good enough for everyday use. They're great for competition. And the advantage of tubeless tyres is you've got all of the advantages of lower rolling resistance and, to a degree, some puncture protection. Because when you put the tubeless milk in there, they can, to a degree, self-seal small cuts. So the question about latex tubes, do we really recommend it anymore? Not really. Just because tubeless is a much better option than latex tubes. Yes, with a latex tube, you do make a rolling resistance reduction. We're talking around 2 to 3 watts per tyre, so it's not insignificant. But you make another step again if you go tubeless. So that with comparing to a normal, rubber butyl tube. One of the bigger problems, there's 2 other problems you get with latex tubes. One is that you get leakage. So if you're doing triathlon, for example, you pump your tyre up the night before, you come into the transition zone the next morning and you've got a fairly flat tyre, so you have to pump it up again before the race. The other problem is they are very not puncture resistant. They're very fiddly to mount. So you can tend to pinch them when you're mounting a latex tube, so also not good from that perspective. And then the big one is what happens on a mountain descent. What happens on a mountain descent is, sorry, we've got my computer's making a lot of fan noise, so I do apologise for that. Hopefully it calms down in a little bit. I'll see if we can fix it. Back to the latex tubes though. On a mountain descent, when your rims get very hot on a rim brake wheel, then you can have a problem with the tubes actually bursting. So not a fan anymore of latex tubes. Don't really recommend them. Would recommend instead a tubeless option. So trying to save our fan noise problem. Moving on from there, again, someone talking about, we'll remain in the wheel area at the moment. One of the problems with what's the best way to choose the fastest tyre and tube setup? It's quite a hard one. Basically, with tyres and tubes, you've got to, particularly with the tyres, 2 things to consider: rolling resistance and aerodynamic drag. Of course, don't forget puncture resistance. So there are some super low rolling resistance tyres out there. In the last talk, I talked about the Vittoria Corsa Speed tyre, which is super low, the lowest rolling resistance tyre that you can get, but terrible in terms of puncture resistance. So, not really recommended. And from an aerodynamic perspective, it's quite terrible for the front wheel. So, but then how do you choose the best tyre? It is a difficult one. The best way I would suggest is to look for independent reviews from the media. For example, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've been doing wind tunnel testing for Triathlon magazine, a German magazine for those who are in the German-speaking area, and they're quite comprehensive. They're doing aero tests with us, then they're out and doing their own rolling resistance tests. So you get a very good idea of what the best tyres are. But rolling resistance data, there's a good place to look for that. It's bicyclerollingresistance.com. They publish quite a lot of rolling resistance data, and I can tell you that it's actually quite accurate. We've done our own independent testing, and it tends to correlate quite well. So recommendation if you're looking for rolling resistance data. In terms of aero data, that's a lot harder to come by. Tune into Swisside or look at some of the data that we've got published on the Swisside website for that. But rule of thumb for tyres, you don't want a slick tyre. So a tyre that has no sidewall tread is terrible for the aerodynamics. Only important for the front wheel, so you don't have to worry about the rear wheel. There you can focus purely on rolling resistance and puncture resistance, but on the front wheel the aerodynamics is very important. So the sidewall tread is quite important. As I mentioned last time, best tyre out there at the moment is an equal race between the Schwalbe Pro 1 TT and the Continental GP 5000 TLE, which is the tubeless version of the tyre. Best aero tyre we had in the past was the Conti GP 4000 S2, which is no longer available. You can get it online in a few places still, but there will be some new tyres coming in the future that we're aware of, so keep an eye out for new tyres in terms of ultimate performance in terms of both aerodynamic drag and rolling resistance. So moving on from there, we had one guy, Blake, asking to know what's the difference between the Hadron Ultimate and the Hadron Classic. So how about I get one of each? 1 second. Well, we'll start with the Hadron Ultimate. So, big thing to say about these wheels, Hadron Ultimate, Hadron Classic, both have the same rims. So we use the same physical rim on the two wheels. Difference being the spokes and the hubs. So we have a thinner spoke on the Hadron Ultimate and we have a much smaller hub. Now, the hubs on the Hadron Ultimates are very, very small in diameter and in the flange width. That's really important for the aerodynamics. It's one of the reasons why some of the competitor wheels perform quite badly aerodynamically is because they have big fat hubs. Bad. So together with DT Swiss, we developed this 240S Aero Hub. There's also a disc brake version, of course, and one of the key features is we minimize the frontal area, minimize the cylinder diameter to improve the aerodynamics. So the difference between Hadron Classic is it has a bigger hub, it has thicker spokes, it's more simple to make, it's a bit cheaper, so we can offer you a price reduction on those wheels. There is an aerodynamic penalty. It's about 1 watt per wheel, depending on which model we're talking about. So not a huge amount, but if you want the ultimate in performance, you go for the ultimate. If you want a absolute top level wheel, and even the Hadron Classic is a lot faster wheel than, even with the 1 watt penalty compared to the ultimate, it's a much faster wheel than many of the, actually pretty much all of the competitor wheels, for an incredible price. Someone just asked the weight difference. For a set of Hadron Classics, they weigh about 100 grams more than a set of Hadron Ultimate. So the price difference between the two wheel sets is around about is 500 euros. So with the Hadron Classic, you save 500 euros for a weight penalty of 100 grams and for a 1 watt drag penalty. So that's the difference. Sorry, the other difference is in the Hadron Classic, we have a Paul hub So the rear hub has a Paul system of ratchets. In the Hadron Ultimate, we have the DD Swiss Star ratchet system, so as well an upgrade in the hub specification. Hadron Ultimate also has ceramic bearings. Hadron Classic has standard bearings. So quite a lot of differences, but the rims are the same. Aerodynamically, we're only talking about 1 watt difference. There we go. Moving on.
Disc release.
Disc rear wheel release. Ooh, lots of questions on the disc rear wheel. Mentioned that last time. This is a project which is continuing. It's fully underway. I have half a disc on the floor behind me. We are in the prototyping phase. One of the differences, we've actually had the disc on the back burner for a number of years. You've seen the discs with the pro athletes. We've had many versions of various prototypes along the way. What has happened is we've had to change production in the last 12 months, and we've basically had to start from scratch with a new producer. Because of that, we have to start again with new materials and make sure the prototyping prototypes are up to scratch. So we are progressing with the disc rear wheel. I'm sorry that we haven't brought it yet, but it is absolutely in the plan. I hate giving dates because you never know when you're in the prototyping phase, but it is very clearly our plan to have a disc for the beginning of next season. Don't expect something this year, although you will see prototypes out on the road. If you live around here, keep an eye out for them. Right, hopefully that answers the disc rear wheel question. If you've got any more questions on wheels, shoot them through. Otherwise, I'm going to start moving a little bit higher on the bike system up towards the bike frame. But by all means, shoot through your questions. We can always come back and speak of those. Right. One of the questions that's already come through was to do with a large air gap between the rear wheel and the bike frame. So I've got a bike behind me. Let me just pick it up. So what this person, our trusty cube area, is talking about is this gap here, right here between the bike and wheel. So I'll put this bike down. So one of the questions is why do we want to close that gap, or is it beneficial to close that gap? Yes, it is beneficial to close the gap. Two main things. One, we prevent cross-jetting, particularly in side wind conditions. And secondly, most importantly, we prolong the length of the profile of that seat tube area. So it is an advantage. Of course, with the UCI legal bikes, you are completely restricted in what you can do there. So that was actually another question that came through, is what could we do if we weren't restricted by the UCI rules? You can do a lot. So a lot of road bikes don't have this closure because you don't have the option to do that with the UCI rules until now, because just recently the UCI has loosened the rules for bike design. I believe sorry, just doing an Instagram, keeping the Instagram guys going, you're back. The UCI have just relaxed the rules, and you can now have larger sections in that area. You can use what we call the compensation triangle. So you will in the future see aero road bikes which will start closing the gap there some more. Prediction from me, because we're designing a bike in that area at the moment and we see some good potential. But yeah, if we didn't have the UCI restrictions, you can do a lot more, and that's what you're seeing in triathlon bikes. So triathlon bikes, no UCI restrictions, you're seeing a lot more of this type of design. Someone's just said, Aero Coach says disc rear wheel would produce a 7 watt saving versus an 80mm wheel. Would you say this is correct? No, this is completely incorrect. We've done first of all, the question is what speed? That's a really important one. You can't talk about watts without talking about speed. I mentioned 1 watt before, bad about me, I should have talked about watt speed. at 45 kilometres an hour is that 1 watt. So rule of thumb, if you talk about 30, the watts power is exponential, with goes up with speed to the power of 3 cubic. So watts at 45 kilometres an hour, if you want to compare that to watts at 35 kilometres an hour, you divide it pretty much by 2. So when I was talking about the Hadron Classic wheels having a 1 watt drag penalty compared to the Hadron Ultimate, that was quoted at 45 kilometres an hour. So at 35 kilometres an hour, which, let's face it, is a more realistic speed for most of us, it's about half a watt, so very small. So coming back to the disc rear wheel, what we measure in the wind tunnel is about a 2 watt difference between our Hadron Ultimate 800 and a complete disc rear wheel at 45 kilometres an hour. So if we're talking about 35 kilometres an hour, you're talking about a 1 watt difference. And that's why it's never been a huge priority for us at Swisside to bring the disc rear wheel, because a disc rear wheel is going to cost in the order of €2,000. And if you compare that to a Hadron Ultimate 800, that's a huge investment for 1 watt. And it's also a disc rear wheel. You can't use it in all conditions. When it gets really windy, like in Kona, the World Ironman Championships, discs are forbidden for that very purpose. Then you can get yourself into trouble when it gets too windy. So to answer the question, 7 watt saving with a disc rear wheel over an 80mm wheel, completely false. At 45 kilometres an hour, unless you've got a really bad disc, and most discs are fairly similar, we're more talking about in the order of 2 watts at 45 kilometres an hour. Right, I just see one other question coming through. What's a more all-round combination, a 485-800 or a pair of 625s? Very good question. So I'm assuming this is a triathlon time trial question, because on an 800 we wouldn't really put one of those on the rear. A 625 set is a great all-round set, because one of the advantages is you can put it on your road bike as well, providing both have the same rim brake or disc brake setup. So a lot of our customers buy a 625 set because they can use it for road and triathlon. But in terms of a 485-800 or a 625 set, I'd be going for 485-800 combination for time trial triathlon. However, the 625 does bring a pretty decent drag saving, pretty decent in terms of wheels, around about 2 watts at 45 kilometres an hour again over the 625. But where it does make a bigger difference is when it's windy, and the sailing effect you get with a 625 over a 485. And then those 2 watts become quite quickly 5, 6, 7 watts. On the Swisside website, you can look at some aero drag graphs that are published there. Take a look if you want to look into detail. I can see a question coming through about athlete positions. We can jump in there. Praying mantis position. Is there a general cockpit angle which works aerodynamically better than flat arms? Very, very good question. We did a study on cockpit positions with Simon Bilal, a French Australian athlete. Well, he's French, but he's living in Perth, Australia. And he came to us in the wind tunnel with the folding bars. And he rides with the bars very much in the praying mantis position, with a very strong angle on arms. It's like around 45 degrees. What we've seen in our tests in the wind tunnel is the praying mantis position brings something when you physically close your hands to your face. But as soon as you've got a gap, it doesn't work anymore. So we saw that the praying mantis position on Simon was the same aero performance as the completely flat arm position. Now, quite different aerodynamic characteristics. We have the ability in the wind tunnel to measure pressure, the wake behind the rider, the pressure losses, and you actually see quite a difference in the pressure loss behind the rider. So I don't think it's something that you can take as a rule of thumb, but from the measurements that we've made, the flat arm position we still see is still the better position. A very important thing, which is one of the reasons I'm not a fan of the praying mantis position, is you've got very little control over the front wheel when you have a strong armed, angled arm position. And one of the things we mention all the time is you, the rider, are 75%, 80% of the aero drag. So you have to be able to stay in that position. Now, if wind gusts come and you can't control your front wheel, for example, or control the bike because you're in this really weird position with very little leverage over the front wheel, then you're going to pull out of your aero position. And then you're talking about massive watt penalties. You're talking 60, 70 watts when you pull out of your aero position. So we don't want to do that. And what we see is with a flat arm position, you've got pretty much the same aero drag from our measurement, but you've got a lot more control over the front wheel. So hence why we are more of a fan of a flat arm position than we are of a praying mantis position.
65 climbing performance.
65 climbing performance. Very good question. So a lot of people, well, all of us in the cycling industry have been brainwashed over the last 20 years about the importance of weight. I can tell you, weight is actually not anywhere near as important as we see. We do a lot of work together with Pro Tour cycling teams. We do a lot of work together with many brands, and we have developed over the years some very powerful performance simulation tools. So we can calculate the aero gains versus the weight penalty of climbing up a hill, for example. And then what we do is we go out and test that with riders to make sure that our simulations are correct. But I can tell you what we see is that a 625, and Jonas, who's sitting next to me, has done a lot of simulations on exactly this topic. Our 625s, even though they're, for example, compared to a climb, a super lightweight 27, 30 millimeter carbon climbing wheel, they'll be, say, 200-300 grams heavier for the set. You are faster with a good set of aero wheels, in particular our Hadron Ultimate 625. Even though there is a weight penalty going up the hill, you still benefit from the aerodynamic drag, aerodynamic drag saving going up the hill. Now, of course, it depends how fast you are. The more professional you are as an athlete, the more power output you have, the higher your speed on the climb, and even more the benefit of the 625. So I believe in our recent study that we did, we saw that the crossover point was around 7.5%. Jonas, am I correct? 7%-ish?
It depends also on the power of the rider.
Yeah, but on the pro rider.
Pro rider, if you're doing 300 watts and you weigh 70 kilos,
yeah,
7% too fast with it.
Yeah, so 300 watt power output on a climb, you'll be faster with the 625s for around about a 70-75 kilo rider. So to answer that question, we see that you'll pretty much, let's call it 99% of the time, be faster with a set of aero wheels than you would be with a set of climbing wheels, even on a climb in the mountains. So go aero wheels. I see another question coming through about, is it faster to have a bottle between the arms or to have the arms and elbows as close as possible? Very good question. So arms close together, bottle between them, pretty much the same result. Now, we've done this test over and over again in the wind tunnel. Some athletes that I can name that we've tested the wind tunnel with exactly these two configurations. 4 times world Ironman champion down in Tenerife, fastest Ironman split, Cameron Worth. Both of those two athletes ride with a super simple off-the-shelf torpedo bottle between their arms. And we see by removing the torpedo bottle, it's an aerodynamic penalty. So filling the gap between their arms is, let's say, and we're talking about like a watt, so it's very small. So it even brings a very small advantage to fill that gap between the arms. One of the problems with bringing the arms completely together is we have seen that it is a slight advantage again, but then you need to have your hydration system somewhere else. It's okay if you have a bike with an integrated hydration system, like a Scott Plasma, like a Canyon Speedmax, like a Cube Arium behind me. But one of the disadvantages of bringing your arms completely together is, I would say at home, go and try it. The tension that you get between your shoulder blades is pretty extreme. And if you want to try and ride with that for 180 kilometres, if you're doing a full Ironman distance, that's pretty hard. So the simple torpedoes between the arms is a very, very good and pretty cheap solution for a good hydration system. And most importantly, you can stay in your aero position and drink at the same time. And as we said, holding your aero position is absolutely key for being fast, because as soon as you break out of your aero position, reach around for a bottle, sit up or whatever, your drag will raise to the tune of 50, 60, 70 watts. So there we go.
Got a bunch of questions. First of all,
so more questions coming through from Jonas? Yeah.
So why have carbon wheels switched back to stainless steel spokes? Why do you need spinachy wheels? Why don't you have these few big carbon spokes?
Okay, very good question. So the question was, why are carbon wheels migrating back towards metallic spokes? So no longer these sort of 3-spoke, 4-spoke, 5-spoke wheels. Good question. We looked at developing a multi-spoke. We call these 3, 4, 5-spoke wheels multi-spoke wheels. We looked at developing multi-spoke wheels in the past because looked to be quite attractive from from the consumer point of view. But what we've seen is they're aerodynamically quite bad. Well, not as good as a steel-spoked wheel. Now, one of the reasons is because the large spoke actually generates quite a large loss. So it has a wake off that spoke itself. It's not very efficient in sailing, although it does bring some sailing effect. But one of the big points is where it joins to the rim, you end up with a big, what we call a junction loss. So the way the pressure gradients form between the spoke and the rim in that area causes that area typically to stall. So you get quite a lot of drag off that junction between the spoke and the rim. And what we've seen is that it pretty much is not good. We're yet to measure a multi-spoke wheel that is better than our Hadron Ultimate wheel. Some of you might be asking the question, well, why on earth are people still using these multi-spoke wheels in velodrome racing? We recently had the World Track Championships, and you did not see a spoked wheel in a World Track Championship race. The reason is, I think, because people just don't know. And there's a perception that the multi-spoke wheels are faster. But the truth is, typically they're not. You can get more or less, and you can get close in straight ahead when the wind is only from the front. So in a velodrome where you don't have crosswind effects, the difference is only very small. But out in the real world, the difference is quite large. So long answer to a simple question. I think the world is moving back to simple bladed spokes because people are able to measure with power meters. With wind tunnels, there's a lot more data available now, and people are actually seeing that these multi-spoke wheels are not faster. So hopefully that answers that question.
So differences between ARC 1100s, 1400s, and Swiss wheels, the Ballard wheels.
Sorry, just resetting our Instagram feed. Hello, Instagram people, welcome back. I'm creating a mess here. As you can see, I'm really good with the mobile phone today. Right, we're back. So, question was, sorry?
Yeah, what's the difference between the DT Swiss ARC?
Difference between DT Swiss ARC wheels and Swiss side wheels. Good question. We get this a lot. The ARC wheels, you will see, have a Aerodynamics by Swiss side label on them. We work very closely together with DT Swiss. They also are the producer for Swiss side wheels. We share these rims together. So the specification is very, very, very similar. We use the physically same rims, but there are small differences in the hub internals, for example. So basically, to answer your question, if you buy a bike that's already specified with the DD Swiss ARC wheel lines, you get all of the benefits that you get with a Swiss side aerodynamic wheel, just with DD Swiss labels. At this point, I beg to differ that the Swiss side wheels...
Sound in the fan is worse now.
Sound in the fan is worse now. Okay, I will try and fix that again. Some small technical difficulties today in the Swiss side office. But yeah, DD Swiss wheels, Swiss side wheels, are more or less the same. Much better now. Okay. Well, I'm going to keep my hand up there and keep this thing away from the fan on my computer. Right. But you're not interested about the fan on my computer. You're interested about aerodynamics. Okay. More questions coming through.
So Bob Redden was asking about his time trial. It's 40k long and 800 meters climbing.
Ooh, Bard Reddin. Hello, Bard Reddin. Bard Reddin, call out to Bard Reddin. He is one of the Swiss side ambassadors. He's a rider living in Switzerland who's originally from Syria. And he's a great guy and a great rider. And he was asking for a 40-kilometer time trial with 800 meters of climbing, what front wheel should he be using? I would say to you, Bud Reddin, depends on the wind on the day. If it's a relatively medium to light wind, I'd go with the 800 on the front because you will benefit at those speeds from the 800. If it starts getting windier, switch back to a 625. I don't see a need to go to a 485 at all for that sort of a time trial. Okay. Disc brake wheels or clincher? Someone has asked. I think you'll need to elaborate on that question. Not quite sure what you mean. Well, in terms of, well, I think I do actually. So clincher versus tubular wheels. Tubular wheels, I would pretty much say, are dead. If you're riding a tubular wheel still, you've pretty much got a disadvantage because tubular tyres nowadays have got higher rolling resistance than the latest generation of tubeless tyres. And the clincher construction of wheels brings you an aerodynamic advantage over the tubular tyres. One of the reasons is because you just don't get this sort of reflex, this light bulb effect that we talk about in the rims. So the tyre to rim interface. So definitely would say tubular tyres are dead. If you want high performance wheels and you want to go faster, you definitely want to be riding clinchers. Disc brake versus rim brake, very common question. Whatever you would like to do is the answer. In terms of aerodynamics, there is always a small penalty with a disc brake wheel. Two main reasons. One, you have more spokes. Two, you have a larger diameter hub. The reason you have a larger diameter hub is because you have to deal with the torque that goes through the hub when you're braking in a disc brake system. So how big is the penalty? We're talking about 2 watts at 45 kilometers an hour. So it's fairly minimal. At 35 kilometers an hour, that's about 1 watt. And of course, with a disc brake wheel, you do have the advantage of being able to brake at having the same braking all the time, consistent, wet, dry, and it's quite convenient to ride with. Especially nowadays, if we consider if you've got a time trial bike or a triathlon bike, and you've got a road bike, and the road bike has disc brakes, which most of them do now. I would recommend going with a disc brake bike because then you can swap your wheels between the two bikes. I'm going to move this phone again to a different position, which means I'm no longer looking at our Instagram followers over here, so please don't be offended, but you won't have the fan noise anymore. So, moving on from disc brake versus rim brake, Someone just asked, what's the cost of a disc brake versus a rim brake wheel? At Swisside, we have a flat price policy. So it doesn't matter. You can combine our wheels, 485, 625, 800, whatever rim depth combination you want, rim brake or disc brake, the set price is the same. So we don't increase the price for a disc brake wheel at all. Some brands do. We think it's just more simple for you to have just one price. Okie dokie. Moving on. More questions. Someone asked me about a Trek SC bike has a small fin around the bottom bracket that gives a more optimum leading edge to the rear tyre. Do you consider this a fast option? Interesting. I cannot say I've ever tested the SC wheel, the SC Trek bike. The speed concept. Oh, I've never. Well, could be. Okay, then I have tested the speed concept bike in a wind tunnel numerous times, but I've never noticed a small fin below the bottom bracket. I mean, looking at it, I have a picture here for those of you who are. I'll show it to our Facebook followers. This thing here, to our Instagram followers. This thing here. Oh yeah, I'm seeing it. Apparently on the website it does have a fin down there. Does it bring something? I would say it's pretty minimal. One of the key things in aerodynamics is you have the drag can be broken down into two main components: frontal area drag, which we call parasitic drag, and profile drag, which is sort of the weight you get, the losses you get off the profile. With a profile like that, we're increasing the frontal area. So you will increase your base drag, you'll increase your parasitic drag. Whether or not you end up with a net reduction in the profile drag because of that, I'd be a little bit skeptical. So I'd probably say it's one of those bits that's sort of like a, what do you call it, a zero-sum game where you end up with nothing. This was a question that was asked last time, which I never got round to asking, which is exactly in the same spirit of that question, is oversized pulley wheels. So we see some brands bringing like these massive oversized pulleys for the jockey wheels at the back of the bike. Good or bad? Benefit or not a benefit? So basically, it's a zero-sum game. We've done the test extensively in the wind tunnel numerous times with numerous athletes. If you calculate the real power improvement that you get through the reduced chain bending angle from these oversized pulley wheels, from what we've measured, you're talking around about 2 watts maximum saving that you get out of that. But when you put these big pulley wheels on the back of the bike, you can actually measurably increase. You can measure an increase in the aerodynamic drag, and it's also in the range of about 2 watts. So 2 watt saving on drivetrain, 2 watt loss aerodynamics, pretty expensive parts for no real improvement. They do look cool though, so if that's what you're into, we have to face it. Like, even though we're a very high performance oriented brand, we also understand that that the looks of the equipment plays a role. They do look cool. If you like that, by all means go for it, but it's quite an expensive add-on, and don't expect that it's going to bring you any significant improvement in performance overall.
Wheel servicing, how often should you have your wheels serviced?
Oh, wheel servicing. How often should you have your wheels serviced? Now, it depends on who you're buying your wheels from. If you're buying your wheels from Swisside, our wheels are built in collaboration with DT Swiss. We only use the absolute best components. These wheels should typically not really need to be serviced. I mean, it's very easy to check your wheels if they're running freely, if they're running true. As particularly carbon wheels, they don't deform like aluminium wheels do. If you hit a pothole, they basically either break or they don't, and typically they don't break, of course. If they're running true, you don't really need to service them very often at all. The bearings that we use in all of our wheels are sealed cartridge bearings, providing no water is getting into them, and you will feel that in the bearings. The bearings are getting rough. Then you don't really need to do anything. With some other brands that use cheaper components and have, say, higher tolerances on their assembly, no, it's a different story. But rule of thumb, feel your bearings, have a look if your rim's running true. If it is, you're pretty much good. Don't necessarily need to service your wheels. So we recommend to regularly check your wheels every few months. Just have a look if they're running true, have a feel of the bearings. If everything's good, have a visual inspection, look for cracks, look for dings, dents. If it's all good, no need to service. Okay. So moving forwards, I've got some more questions. So keep asking. Okay.
Rough breakdown of bike components. How much contribution around, so bike frame, fork, cockpit, wheels?
Ooh, rough breakdown on bike components. So the question was, what's the breakdown of the fork versus the frame versus the bike? I cannot answer you that off the top of my head. I would have to open one of my CFD reports or one of my presentations to have a look at that. But in terms of the overall aerodynamic drag, what I can tell you off the top of my head is the wheels and the frame, so frame and fork assembly, have pretty much the same drag contribution. But the wheels, and it's around about, each of them are about 8% of the total bike and rider system. So frame and wheels together is about 16% of the power consumption of what you put in your pedals. But, so what's coming out of this is the rest of its drivetrain, and of course you, the rider. 80% is 75 to 80% is you, the rider. That's why you on the bike is really important, and I think we'll move towards that in a second, because if you want to be fast, you need to be focusing on your aero kit and your aero position. But the sailing effect is a really big one, and the wheels in particular produce 65% of the sailing effect. So the way we can use the wind to reduce the drag and produce even some thrust, the wheels are the main component for that. The bike is around about 35% of the sailing effect on the system. So hopefully that answers that question. Someone's asking, do I have an estimated lifespan for your ceramic bearings in kilometres in case of dry conditions and no dust? We've had wheels with 30,000 kilometres on them that have bearings that feel perfect in them and they don't need replacing. So it very much dependent on, like you say, the conditions you're riding, the road roughness. It's really difficult to really put a number on them. But good wheels, good hubs, built with the right tolerances, with good quality bearings. I mean, you should be able to do 20,000 kilometres plus on a set of wheels, depending on, not that you're riding Paris-Roubaix 20,000 kilometres worth, then I'd say your bearing life is significantly less. Very good. So moving on, I said we should talk about suits and position and rider. We talked earlier in this workshop about the praying mantis position, whether it's good or bad. I mentioned not a fan of it because you can't control the bike as well in the praying mantis position. I'd say there are a number of key points to consider when we're talking about rider position. So first of all, getting lower typically is going to be faster. Very rare, especially for say amateur athletes like myself. We're not full pros. We sit at our desk most of the day behind our computer, so we're not super flexible. Typically, if we can get lower, and typically with a bit of yoga and a bit of stretching, we can get lower, you will be faster. So one of the key things, and it costs you nothing, is to do stretching and to do some yoga and to try and get lower. That will make you faster. Putting our Instagram friends back on again. Hello Instagram, welcome back. So getting lower is always going to be better. We've seen conflicting reports to this from people who have done some track tests. We do extensive wind tunnel testing. Can't say I've ever measured. I think I've measured once with a pro athlete that was so low that it was neutral for him to go higher. That was Andreas Raylett, and therefore the higher position was worth for him to take, because obviously the lower you go, you can get into danger, because your hip flexor angle gets really tight, you start blocking off the blood flow to your legs. Your legs is what drives the power, so you don't want to go too low. But the other problem is, if you go too low and you can't hold that position for the entire race distance. Now, if you're doing a 40-kilometre time trial, you can probably be more aggressive. If you're doing a 180-kilometre Ironman distance, you probably want to make sure that you can hold that position. Because if you can't hold the position, and I've seen this myself in competitions, you get into the second lap of an Ironman and people are riding around holding the base bar, well then the 4 or 5 watts that they've maybe saved by going 2 or 3 centimetres lower in their aero position has now cost them 60 or 70 watts because they're riding around on the base bar. So rule number 1 is ride the lowest position that you can ride for an entire distance. If you can't ride it for the entire distance, go higher, because that's really important. The second thing is you want to make sure you can still push the power. So one thing we say to athletes or with our pro athletes when they come with their trainers, we're not ergonomic specialists, so we typically always work with the trainers of our athletes. We make sure that they test the various positions and make sure that they're not losing power in the lower position. Because let's say we test a lower position, 2 centimetres lower, let's say for argument's sake it's 5 watts better in terms of aerodynamic drag, but they're losing 10 watts in terms of their power output, then obviously it's not a good position. So these are tests you can do for yourself. Go out for a ride, test some lower positions, and make sure you can pedal the same power in your pedals in the lower position. If you can, then it's probably most likely a very good solution. So we talked about arms together, arms apart, drink bottle solution. Drink bottle between the arms is actually a very good solution. Aerodynamically normally neutral, or even a very slight 1 watt performance saving if you have the drink system between the arms. So once you've got a good aero position, what else is important? Helmet and suits are really important. If you having a good aero suit, you can easily save 15 watts of drag, and that's even 35 kilometres an hour between a loose-fitting top with a set of shorts. So one of your first investments that you should make if you want to go faster in TT or triathlon is a good tight-fitting aero suit. Now, it's really hard to really say which is the fastest suit because the materials and how they fit on your body and your body shape and your body position all play a role into which suit is best for you. But I've said in previous workshops, as a rule of thumb, pick a suit that fits well. We typically see rough suits are better for low-speed athletes. When I talk about low speed, I'm talking 35 to 42, 43, 44 kilometres per hour. Smooth suits typically won't work until much higher speeds. We're talking 50k an hour plus. So if you're a mere mortal like most of us are, you're doing triathlon, you're doing amateur time trials, the rough suits, particularly in the arms, are typically better than smooth suits. So rule of thumbs, pick a suit with rough sleeves, like a waffle material or a ribbed material, and most importantly, pick a suit that fits tightly and has the least number of wrinkles as possible, and you're going to have a significant benefit. And you'll be able to measure this. Don't take my word for it. If you've got a power meter on your bike, do a back-to-back yourself, ride a constant speed, you will see the watt differences. It's pretty enormous. So those sorts of changes you can measure for yourself. The other big difference where you will be able to measure a difference is with a helmet. So a typical time trial helmet, here's a cast helmet. A time trial helmet compared to a normal helmet will always bring you a significant advantage. Basically, we're looking at differences of around up to 5 to 10 watts at 35 kilometres an hour. 10 watts is quite extreme, but we recently did a test for Road Bike magazine in Germany where we measured a 10 watt difference between 2 helmets. So that was pretty significant. So helmets will bring you an advantage, but don't forget your cooling. Cooling is really important, especially in hot races. Kona Ironman, Ironman Frankfurt last year, stinking hot. If you've got a helmet like this cask, that's ventilation includes 6 very small slits that do very little. Good luck. But pro tip, take the visor off. Take the visor off, you get a significant increase in cooling. And I've said this time and time again, we've done the test visor on, off so many times in the wind tunnel, we cannot or typically don't measure a difference more than about half to 1 watt. So if it's a really hot day and you've got a helmet that doesn't cool very well and you want some better cooling, simple, put your sunglasses on and leave the visor off. I would not recommend during the race putting the visor in this sort of high position because you've got like a gurney flap here that's going to trip and probably create a lot of drag, so that's not really recommended. Yeah, there's a tip for your helmet.
Is there a question as well here?
A helmet question, yes?
Yes, how does the new Ruby project really compare to the Matt Coda Tonka and Drive to Zero Aero shoots?
Very interesting. So there was a question regarding how does the new Rudy project wing helmet compared to the Met Coda Tronka, which is also a new short tail helmet from Met, and the Drag to Zero switch helmet. I cannot say I have tested the Drag to Zero switch, so I cannot give you a objective answer on that, but I have tested the Met Coda Tronka back to back with the new Rudy Project wing helmet, and I can tell you the Rudy Project wing helmet is both faster aerodynamically in a head forward and also a head down position, and also delivers significantly more cooling. So a little bit of a background on the Rudy Project wing, the wing it's called. This was a project we developed aerodynamically for Rudy Project, so we know this helmet very intimately. We have the ability in the wind tunnel to do both aerodynamic drag measurements as well as cooling measurements. And we've benchmarked a hell of a lot of helmets in recent times. And so we have a very good idea of the drag figures. And as I mentioned before, stay tuned for the German listeners for a soon-to-come helmet publication from Road Bike magazine. We recently did a big test on helmets for them, where a lot of these helmets, or a lot of the Aero Road helmets, sorry, not the time trial helmets, were tested. So keep an eye out for that. Someone was asking about saddle positions. Can you see a very advanced muscular and aerodynamic advantage? Can't really tell you that. Moving forwards or backwards on the bike. We've done a little bit of testing of that, typically because of athletes wanting to test forward or rearwards positions. From an aerodynamic perspective, we typically don't measure anything. Typically because the frontal area and the general shape of the body doesn't change if it's just a parallel shift. In terms of muscular advantage, again, I won't claim to be an ergonomic specialist, so I can't really answer that. Probably a better question for a physiologist in that sense. Yeah, pass on that one.
Matthew, an Aussie in Switzerland.
Matthew, an Aussie in Switzerland, has a question.
Asks, what bike do you ride and where is your favorite place for cycling?
What bike do I ride? I ride a Cervelo S5 Aero road bike. In terms of a road bike, my favourite place to go cycling is on the south side of the lake, on the higher rolling hills, going towards Sattleg, over Sattleg towards Einsiedeln. Beautiful area. I believe I'll be riding that tomorrow if you want to look out for me on the Sattleg Pass. Time trial bike, I ride a Cube Arium triathlon bike, quite simply because we developed it in collaboration with Cube. fastest time trial bike on the market. Yeah, super fast. The only downside for that is my legs are probably not fast enough to do it justice, so I need to train more. Right.
James asks here, so he seems to be faster on his club TT on a track in Monza than the Canyon Speedmax. But he reckons it's something to do with the gearing. What do you reckon? Why is faster on the Monza than the Speedmax?
Matt was asking why is he faster on a track in Monza than he's on his Canyon. James, than his Canyon Speedmax. Can't answer that. Canyon Speedmax is a pretty fast bike. One of the fastest bikes on the market. Should be faster than the Trek. So can't answer that one.
If you're going slow uphill.
If you're going slow uphill, yeah. Time trial bikes aren't so great going slow uphill, so that I can tell you. The position does give you a penalty in terms of what you can push in terms of watts. I can tell you that for me, in terms of my Cervelo S5 road bike and my Cube TT bike, I've been laughed at going up a couple of passes because I just can't keep up. Thank you, Jonas. That's mainly because, I just can't push the same watts in the aero position or in the low crouch down position. So there is always a penalty of being in an aero position on a bike, that's for sure. Right, so we've only got 2 minutes left. From our experience last time, our Instagram followers will drop off at exactly 60 minutes. So for the Instagram followers, I do thank you for following today. If you've got any more questions, ask them quickly. For the Facebook guys, I can answer any further questions that come in the next few minutes.
Shimano WTF asks, really haunting my back and keeping the drops increase aerodynamics.
Ooh, Shimano WTF asks if hunching his back and keeping on the drops is improving the aerodynamics. Absolutely. We did a study on road bike positions, top of the drops, on the hoods, going to the drops, significant drag savings. We're talking 30 watts, and you will be able to measure that with your own power meter. A good intimate position, intermediate position, which is very good, is on the drops, but with your hands on the hoods with bent elbows. So riding like this, it's quite a comfortable position and aerodynamically almost as good as being on the complete drops. So in terms of a road bike, for example, for me, ever since we did those tests a couple of years ago, aerodynamicist tip, I try and ride on the drops as often as possible. Again, don't take my word for it. Ride your road bike with a power meter and you will see the watt savings for yourself. So there we go.
So Paul on Facebook asks if today did you say that the 800 rears is not recommended for road races?
Paul from Facebook is asking if an 800 rear is not recommended for road racing. I don't not recommend it. Is aerodynamically, sure, it's aerodynamically quicker. But we just tend not to see road races using such deep profile wheels. But it's a very good question. Put the styling rulebooks out the door. Why wouldn't we run an 800 if it's not too much wind? If you're not riding really fast mountain descents, because one of the problems is when you're riding fast mountain descents, you can get some wind buffeting. That can be dangerous in the mountains, which is why we typically don't recommend 800s in the mountains. But if you're doing road racing in sort of rolling hills, in flatter areas, and the wind is not particularly strong, why not? So we've lost our Instagram, so I'm stuck. We're just Facebook followers and myself left. So yeah, very good question. Why not? We should be asking ourselves, like I said earlier, there's been a lot of sort of not deliberate brainwashing over the years, like weight. In cycling, we should be asking ourselves all of these questions. So yeah, why not ride a set of 800s on a road bike? And as I mentioned earlier, with the changes to the UCI rules, which are coming in, which are going to lead to aero road bikes looking very much bigger and fatter and more like TT bikes, definitely on the rear, a 800 or a deep section wheel would indeed look okay and would definitely be faster. So thanks for asking that question. Alrighty, so we have reached the 60-minute mark. It is now 6 p.m. Thank you everybody for taking part in the workshop tonight. I hope I've been able to answer some of your questions, provide you with some interesting input. As always, if you want answers to Aero questions, send us an email. Drop us comments at the Swiss Side social media sites. We're very much about sharing our know-how and our findings from our research with you. We want to educate the cycling community about aerodynamics. We can back up all of our data with real measurements. If there's stuff you want to see measured, send us an email. We're in the wind tunnel when we're not talking about COVID-19 times. We're in the wind tunnel every other week, if not every week. So we're always keen to do some tests for you. So send us your testing wishes. Tell us what you want to know, and we'll make sure that we answer you in future editions of whatever we do. Sign up for our newsletter at Swiss Side. We often have lots of aero tips that we release, and that's exactly the type of platform, as well as on social media, where we'll answer those questions. Alrighty, so thank you very much, everybody, for joining again tonight. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay happy, get out on your bikes if you're allowed to. Keep riding and enjoy the beautiful spring that we're having right now. All right, thank you everybody, and see you again next time.